see Jody again. Until Doucette makes a big mistake. Because that night at the motel, he decides to allow Jody to make a call back home to his mom. And so Jody calls his mom and they have a quick talk. But what Doucette doesn't know, and what mom doesn't even know at this point, is that the FBI had tapped her phone. Because they were hoping that at some point Doucette would call. And they were right. So they trace the call and pretty quickly, boom, police bust through the motel door and bam, they arrest Doucette. Here's his mugshot. And Jody ultimately gets sent back home to Baton Rouge to be with his parents. But here's where the story gets really crazy. They put Doucette in jail, and 2 weeks later, they extradite him from California all the way back to Baton Rouge. That same day, Gary goes to a local restaurant to get lunch. And even though he just got his son back, he's still upset. I mean, police told him all the terrible things Doucette did to Jody. So Gary is just sickened by all this, and he can't get over it. It's eating him alive. Which I assume would be normal for any parent. I mean, your son gets kidnapped and violated. I imagine you'd be losing your mind too. Thinking of all the crazy shit, just wanting to punch holes in the wall. I mean, you'd be mad, I would. So anyway, Gary's at this restaurant, and a local news reporter recognizes him. And he's like, "Hey, Gary, do you know what time Doucette's extradition is?" And of course, Gary doesn't know. I mean, police never told him. But then, that reporter finds out the information. And for some reason, he goes back to Gary and tells him, "Hey, turns out they're gonna be bringing Doucette through Baton Rouge Airport around 9 o'clock tonight." And that moment is when Gary just snaps. And he decides he's gonna get revenge on Doucette. And he goes and he gets his pew-pew and he heads to the airport. Because he is not gonna let this slide. Shit's about to get real. And so he's there at the airport, and he's wearing a disguise, a baseball hat and sunglasses. And there are news camera crews and police all over the place, and everyone is there waiting for officers to arrive and perp walk Doucette through the area. And Gary, he gets on a payphone, and he's got his back to everyone so that no one will see him and recognize him. And that is when the police escort enters, and they're walking through with Doucette, and he's right here. And right as they walk past Gary, and Gary's here, he quickly grabs his pew-pew, and he points it at Doucette's head, and blam! Now, obviously, I can't show you the full video, it's way too gruesome, and I don't want my video removed, but the local news camera crews captured the whole thing. And so, bam, Gary is immediately arrested, and Doucette is rushed to the hospital, and there, he actually dies the next day. But here's the complicated part. Jody is actually mad at Gary over all this. Because in his 11-year-old mind, he saw Doucette as his good friend. The guy who showed him around LA and took him to Disneyland. And from his perspective, his dad just suddenly unalived his good friend. And Jody stays mad at him for a long time. But eventually, they do mend their relationship and they make up. But anyway, Gary ends up taking a plea deal where the charges against him are dropped down to manslaughter. So, at the end of it all, he only gets community service and 5 years probation for unaliving this predator. And ultimately, he spends 0 time in prison for this. And here is what he looked like in real life.